Thank you, Mr. Chair. In many communities, the drought is exacerbating a long-standing issue of groundwater contamination and groundwater overdraft. So how will the groundwater funding to the State Water Resources Control Board be used to address these longer-term issues, which also impact the current drought?
So I'll take that question again as well, Ms. Hancock. At this point in time in the governor's budget, there was funding that was originally included, and this accelerates some of that funding so the State Water Board can work in conjunction with the Department of Water Resources, which already has a groundwater elevation monitoring program, and begin to identify which of the basins around the state are in most critical need and have the greatest problem with respect to long-term overdraft. And it would allow both the local agencies, the legislature, and the State Water Resources Control Board to prioritize those basins based on the information. In many respects, the funding to the State Water Board is not about immediate drought response. Although when you mention the issue of groundwater contamination that can be exacerbated by drawdown, it will allow the Water Board and the regional water quality control boards to better tailor regulatory actions, and the State Water Board and the Department of Public Health to accelerate financing to those communities that may have problems that are exacerbated by drawdown.
Well, what's the time frame? Because overdrafts of groundwater, contaminated groundwater, can have quite an immediate impact, and this sounds like a lot of study followed by maybe some regulation someday.
Well, certainly with information is essential in order to act, and that is what a lot of the funding on the groundwater component for the State Water Board really supports. And some of those, like I said, to the extent that identifies immediate concerns, will allow the regulatory actions or the financing actions by the water boards. But our groundwater resources, you're right, they have acute problems, but there really are reservoirs for getting through extended droughts like this when we can't rely on surface water diversions because it's not raining. So in many respects, the governor's budget and the proposal here begins to lay the foundation so that we can ensure in the future locals in the state have the ability to.
So begins to lay the foundation means a long time before action. Are you anticipating, has this been a wake-up call for us? I've been interested, for instance, to read some reports that actually go back many, many years saying that we're one of the western states that has virtually a Wild West situation here in terms of groundwater. And if we're talking about communities with no water, it seems to me that we should be looking at perhaps by June of this year, will we have an overview of what's going on in these groundwater basins?
Certainly, California is unique in that it does not, I shouldn't say unique, amongst the western states it's unique in that there's not any kind of statewide backstop for groundwater supply. The governor has, through the Secretaries of Food and Agriculture, Environmental Protection and Natural Resources, has a water action plan that is beginning to focus on these groundwater issues. And I think there is an increasing recognition that local agencies need to be prepared to step up and address the issues. The reality is by June, we're not going to have something in place at the state level that will be able to.
No studies or anything, just so that we can have a sense of the severity of the problem, so we can look at how we might want to mitigate it or decide that we won't mitigate it, and then what are the consequences going to be for other kinds of storage or diversion. You know,
the State Water Board has been developing a lot of information through its groundwater concept paper over the last few months, and I would expect by the time we get to June, we will have a clearer picture as to what's going on, and this will certainly help inform both the board, the governor, as well as the legislature about what the real state of our groundwater basins is. Because again,
is there an expected time when the concept paper will be produced, ready?
Well, the concept paper, the state board held a workshop on it earlier this year, and actually it is being finalized at this point in time. It's more of a framework for further actions, of which, you know, looking at basins is a component. And there is a lot of work that the governor is doing in the context of the budget to try to help identify the tools that the local agencies need in order to effectively manage their local groundwater basins.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Hancock. Clearly, the whole issue of groundwater monitoring and protection is a larger one than the drought, something that is you've mentioned.
It is, but we do want to lay the groundwork so that we don't find ourselves at some point without surface water or groundwater.
Oh, no, without a doubt. We need to address it now, but then we've got a bigger problem.
Yes,
independent of the...
but I certainly understand that we want to move forward today with these immediate actions, which are very, very important. And I think the governor and our leadership have put those together very, very well, and understanding that it's just a beginning.
You identify a serious issue. So, Senator Jackson.
Thank you very much. I too appreciate your being willing to come here and chat with us today. We've had a number of conversations, and I'm not going to rail on my disappointment and horror that we don't have any groundwater policies in this state, for a state that is so drought. We're not drought tolerant at all. We're drought regularly in drought or in floods, or just a state without appropriate policies to deal with these problems. And here we are again. And I share Senator Hancock's concern. We're talking. When are we going to put something on paper? I know the governor has his water plan, and I'm looking forward to the opportunity to be able to step back and do some good policy on this issue. I hope that bell has finally rung enough times that we realize that we just have to do this. And I look forward to that. I look forward to being part of that. And we all come here and we serve our constituents, but we also try to do good policy for the state. And I try to always keep that in mind when we have these hearings and when we are asked to consider legislation and asked to consider bonds or funding mechanisms for different parts of the states and the different needs that they have. However, I come here today with a very specific concern about my own district. And while I appreciate the fact that there are drinking water problems, that we have invasion, all sorts of problems with the Delta. We have all sorts of problems over the state, and right now I have a really big problem in my district, and I'd like to know where in this bond, or in these bonds, there is going to be money to assist in a place called Lake Cachuma in Santa Barbara County. There were some articles about this in the LA Times not long ago, but this water body serves as the primary water supply reservoir for the city of Santa Barbara, Goleta, Montecito, the Carpinteria Valley water districts. So we have a lot of ag, we've got a lot of people, we are the source of a lot of income to the state by way of tourism. And oh, by the way, for those of us who live there, it'd be nice if we also had access to water. So it is also the repository of water delivered from the State Water Project. So through these water purveyors, the south coast of Santa Barbara County's population, approximately 200,000 people, it's almost entirely dependent on the surface and State Water Project from this reservoir. There is no other means of delivering water, including water from the State Water Project, to the south coast of Santa Barbara County. None. We are now in a crisis situation where the water level has gotten so low that it's below the pipe. So we can't, or in a couple months, we won't be able to pipe that water. For reasons that I don't totally understand, part of it perhaps because it wasn't the crisis last year, we need about $3 or $4 million to fix that problem. Could you please tell me where in the $600 million there would be money available for that project?
It's a very good question, and it's one that I don't have the answer to today, but I would be happy to get back to you on that. I'm just not familiar with that specific issue.
I guess the challenge for me is there was $600 million going out throughout the state. I feel as though I have a strong responsibility to the 200,000 people who are that dependent on this water source to be able to answer to them that, yes, the state will be stepping up and helping us fix this problem. What do you suggest?
I am happy to gather more information from our agencies who are on the ground and understanding these situations much better than me, and get back to you, because I don't know what exactly the nature of the issue is, and I think that would really depend on the pot of money that would be available to help address what sounds like a very serious situation.
Well, let me ask you this then. We're being asked today, and I realize this is expedited, and I realize this is a crisis throughout the state, and we each do have a responsibility to the state as well as to our own districts. Are there other pots of money, or will there be other pots of money if these are not necessarily, again, we're trying to do 6 months' work in 6 days, and I appreciate everyone's working very hard to accomplish that, but will there be other pots of money available to address these kinds of dire problems? I mean, if we have a problem, and I don't think there's any dispute about the nature of the problem I've just articulated to you, are we going to be able to access various pots of money? Will there be enough flexibility, if not here, then in other pots of money, other resources that are available, that we can address this problem?
Senator Jackson, if I could just interject here for a moment. The concerns, all right, that you've just expressed, I'm not familiar with the specifics of it, but as you've described it, I would imagine that probably the largest pot within the entire $678 million pot would be in infrastructure investments, as you've just described it, and that's $472 million in Prop 84 dollars. So I don't know if there's language that would be necessary to make this project eligible, and I want to emphasize the word eligible because all of us are being lobbied by our own districts. Make sure that our projects get earmarked into that bill, and for obvious reasons, we can't have any earmarks. I would imagine we'd walk right into a veto if there were specific earmarks for projects. But eligibility, I would think, should be fairly recognized so that at least you can compete for the dollars. So I don't know if there's a way to get some quick clarification on just the eligibility question for Senator Jackson, Ms. Bosler.
Well, my understanding is that these are projects that have, there's been a process, and I'm not sure, and I'm not asking for a commitment that this specific project, I'm just asking where is the pot of money that, if you will, we could apply. My understanding is that a lot of this, there's been a process, and I don't believe that this project has necessarily gone through that process. I'm looking for some flexibility here because I don't think there's any dispute. I know in each of our districts, I'm sure there are causes of concern, but if they haven't qualified under a pre-existing set of rules, or if they don't qualify necessarily under the particular prescriptions of Proposition 84, are we going to let these projects be out of luck because we are so committed to adhering to these very stringent requirements?
So, I mean, the Integrated Regional Water Management Program, which Senator Leno just alluded to, there is going to be, I understand, a new process for the round 3. Round 2 of funding grants just went out. $133 million was just allocated. But now we're on to a round 3, and my understanding that it is going to be a new process.
Expedited.
And expedited.
And expedited to what point in time?
And expedited. So, there is going to still be a process, but the Department of Water Resources is certainly committed to getting the money on the ground as quickly as possible to the projects. And the bill that is before you, $200 million of that $470 million is really targeted towards these drought-related projects. And so it is being specifically targeted. The other thing that I would point out is that the $15 million general fund for the Department of Public Health that was alluded to earlier, that is to address emergency drinking water shortages due to the drought. So, unfortunately, we don't have all the specifics of the particular project you had in mind, but just on the surface, it sounds like that would be potentially eligible, as Senator Leno mentioned, for that. But we would be happy to follow up with you on that. There is a wide array of programs trying to be comprehensive to address all the different situations throughout the state. And between the $15 million for emergency drinking water and the $470 million for these broader water conservation and water supply reliability projects, we'd be happy to work with you to figure out which is the best fit.
Got it.
I guess.
And I guess my point, and I appreciate that, I didn't mean to assume that I wanted a commitment on this project today, but what I would like is assurances that there's going to be enough flexibility, because I've heard every district has its problems and they're dire. But assurances that we're not going to continue to demand that we fit a square peg into a round hole. If people's communities have a tremendous need, we're losing, with agriculture, people have to bus in or truck in drinking water. I mean, I don't mean to suggest that I'm alone in this, but I am concerned that we be responsive to the needs of our communities, and that we have in these programs sufficient resources, or the flexibility with these resources, that we will be able to accommodate these needs.
And I think that that's really the intention behind the governor's drought task force, is really to be constantly monitoring the situation on the ground, and having that type of flexibility that you're talking about, to ensure that really dire situations are avoided and the appropriate response is being made.
Thank you.
Senator Jackson, just a couple more suggestions for your particular situation. The subcommittee will be hearing this in greater detail March 27th. Clearly, the task force is going to be prioritizing immediate needs, and we need to get to those communities that are within a 30 or 60-day period of running out of water. Yours seems to have a little bit longer lead time, that there can be additional proposals put forward at the budget subcommittee, because, again, these are just initial investments. This drought's going to unfold in months ahead. We're going to be back allocating additional funds. There may be other situations that need to be addressed if, in fact, for whatever reason, the language is such that you might not find eligibility in this $472 million. I'm hoping that it is, but if it's not, there will be other avenues. And then also there is the consideration of the water bond that will also be looking at larger issues that this immediate drought relief won't.
Again, and I appreciate that. Again, my concern is that we're light enough, that we're flexible enough, that we can pivot.
We're going to need to be.
Exactly. That's the concern, and I think that is, I suspect, what most of us are anticipating will be the case. I just want to be assured that will be the case, because we are, if we're viewed by the public as just an intractable bureaucracy, we are not serving them well.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Roth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My questions go to the amendments to Section 1052 of the Water Code. I'll preface it by saying, as you all know, I am certainly no expert in this area. But we're talking about increased penalties, and my personal view, frankly, is that we make sure that the increases in the penalties are directly related to the nature of the misconduct. We talk about illegal diversions, which sort of implies a know or should have known standard, maybe not. And then the bill talks about unauthorized, did I say disclosures, diversions. And the bill talks about unauthorized diversions. And I guess my specific question is, what do we do to distinguish between an inadvertent unauthorized diversion, which I assume can occur, and an intentional unauthorized diversion? Or do we just penalize the inadvertent the same as we penalize the intentional? Now, what I'm not sure of is whether this is addressed in the amendments to 1052 sub D.
So thank you, Senator. Again, Michael Loffer with the State Water Board. In terms of a showing of intent, that's generally not the way that the water rights regulatory system works. I mean, people are expected to know the nature of their water rights, but the Water Board does take inadvertence into account. And the amendments to Water Code Section 1052 concern illegal diversions and allow for heightened penalties for illegally diverting water during a time of drought. But all of the authorities, whether they're implemented through the Water Board issuing what's known as an administrative civil liability, or through the courts issuing a civil liability judicially, first of all, there's prosecutorial discretion. I mean, if it was an innocent mistake, there may not even be an enforcement action pursued. These are not mandatory penalties. The second thing is the Water Board has to take account of a variety of factors, all relevant circumstances. The specific provisions are in Water Code Section 1055.3. And those relevant sections include, but are not limited to, the extent of harm caused by the violation, the nature and persistence of the violation, which often will get to the intent, if you will, as well as the length of time over which the violation occurs and the corrective action taken, if any. And so that's how the Water Board and the courts address those kinds of inadvertent issues. And again, they go into factoring whether an enforcement action is pursued in the first instance, and then to the amount of a penalty.
So to the extent a company, or I assume a farm operation, has a training program and has rules in place that are strictly enforced, and I'm just trying to figure out how this would play out, an employee, a rogue employee perhaps, goes to sleep, leaves the valves open, allows a diversion to occur which should not have occurred, that both the Water Board and the courts would take that into consideration and either seek a reduced penalty or perhaps no penalty at all.
That's correct. That would be the kind of circumstance that would be taken into account by the boards of the court.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Roth. I had some of the same concerns that you have had, and I think some of the amendments and some of the explanations that Mr. Lawford's made are helping to address them, because I think it's at the same time that we need to really put the fear of God in everybody, that this is a serious situation. Business owners, everyone who has access to potentiality of water diversion must be vigilant by the hour that mistakes are not made. At the same time, we need to make clear that we understand the difference between negligent and intentional. So before we get to Senator Corbett, I just wanted to ask another question. Could you identify which of these proposals will require a local match? And the reason I'm asking is that, is it possible that those communities that are most in need could be those communities least able to identify matching funds, which would be counterintuitive to what we're trying to do here?
So
and maybe that's not the situation at all. I just want to clarify.
There's a lot of different pots. So the $15 million for the emergency drinking water definitely does not include a match. So that's really the money that we hope to deploy, quickly to address very serious shortages of drinking water. I do believe there are other pots that do require a match.
Yeah, let me take a stab at that. And Representative from DWR could correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the $470 million for the integrated regional water management. The answer is it depends. If it's a disadvantaged community, then no match would be required.
That's just across the board?
Across the board,
okay.
Just as their general guidelines, disadvantaged communities, there generally isn't a match. But the more matching funds that are put up, the more competitive the project is. And so, of a set amount of $470 million, to the extent there's more of a match, the more competitive it would become. So it depends on the disadvantaged communities and the competitive process.
All right. So that's taken into account.
Yeah.